Over the years, I've hashed out what I love and hate about every single game in FromSoft's growing compendium. There's admittedly a lot more to admire than despise in their masterpieces. This was never more apparent than in my recent replay from Demon's Souls all the way to Sekiro in anticipation for Elden Ring. An extended hiatus from the series allowed me to look upon it with a refreshed perspective, bringing about a desire to do something I've never done. Take a single video to share my thoughts on the series as a whole, to discuss various overarching themes, design philosophies, and shared attributes rather than each game's individual merit. With one caveat. Bosses are officially off limits. I think my borderline obsessive appreciation for them has been well documented. So without further ado, here's 10 things I love and hate about the Souls series, other than the bosses.
I don't believe you.
My first hatred is boss runbacks. Hey, this hatred has nothing to do with the battles themselves, rather the arduous time wasted getting back to sweet nirvana against them. The way I see it, the moment you embrace that fog, the level is over. Done. Finished. Every ounce of my focus is diverted to that clash I'm rewarded with for completing the journey to it. The rush of battle is one I want to become fully engrossed in, an atmosphere of pure bloodlust. You know, like Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. Yeah, I'm that for Souls bosses. Anything in the way at that point is meaningless to me. Even if I could rave all day about FromSoft's level design, repetitively having it shoved down my throat when I feel I've moved past it is a sour feeling. Especially when a boss is difficult and requires extensive attempts, and especially when the runback itself is horrendous. Take a boss I raved about in my last video on underrated bosses, False King Allant. That tense elevator ride to the palace's peak really loses its luster after the first go, let alone if he bops you a dozen times as he's fully capable of. Not to mention the Red Knights, Fat Ministers, and Dragon blocking your path. Take another boss from that list, the Rotten. You know one of the reasons he was so great for boundless bonfire-astic farming? Because his bonfire is 2 inches from his lair. Spit poison in my eye all day long if it means I get a quick trek back to battle. And I'm focusing on good bosses here. Don't even get me started on offensive runbacks to skirmishes of suckage in the optional Dark Souls 2 DLC areas. These hellscapes, supposedly intended for multiple players, reward an orgy of petrification with a mediocre gank invasion, a passage of pain with mages out of your reach to slow you while faster enemies gangbang you en route to a copy-paste of an already tread battle. You paid for this! Though that's hardly as offensive as Reindeer Fuckland. My favorite frosty vacation featuring an endless colonoscopy of antlers and obscuring players' vision in an empty wasteland rather than developing anything compelling at all. Much like the double helping a copy-paste pussy from the same DLC waiting for you at the very end. These are by far some of the most egregious, and I will concede that FromSoft has lessened these sort of runbacks in later entries, especially in Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro. In fact, Miyazaki recently stated runbacks would be reduced in Elden Ring, which I can confirm from my experience in the network test. It's a wonderful thing to see FromSoft learning from their mistakes. I also love to see them stick to their guns when it comes to being merciless. You could summarize my complaints about runbacks as being unfair usages of time that takes emphasis away from what I really want to enjoy. I can wail like a baby all day long, but that doesn't change the fact that, at least at the time, the developers decided runbacks were part of what they wanted the player to overcome in a struggle against a boss battle. Dark Souls is ripe with the perception of unfair moments like this, and while I'd love to say that I hate them, I have to admit that the momentary anger subsides in hindsight when I can view them from a grander perspective. These moments play a large role in shaping each player's experience. It's exactly what Miyazaki wants. He's on record saying difficulty has never been his goal. Big challenges are simply a way to push the players back against the wall and see how they respond. In many cases, they provide a perfect balance of intentional design and player agency, that allowing the player to reflect on their mistakes and admit, I see what I could have done different, it's my fault, not the game's. Then you have cases like Reindeer Fuckland. On what planet is tossing endless powerful enemies at the player while blinded in an obscure search for an exit balanced design? It's not at all. Thing is, I don't think that was the goal. Rather, they want to test your limits, really push you to the point of being uncomfortable, drive you to the very brink before you're so fed up you're about ready to stop playing. But no. Rather, you don't want to admit defeat. You start to gain momentum back. You strategize, gain ground in skill, and start sprinting full steam towards success until you claim victory. This is the goal of these games, to push you to that edge, see how you respond, and hopefully give you a meaningful feeling at the end. Sometimes, in the case of Iron Passage, that might be a sigh of relief, saying thank God it's over. More often than not though, you're overwhelmed with an immeasurable euphoria. Even in the event you find in hindsight you didn't enjoy the experience or felt slighted, it made such a deep impression on us that we're still talking about it years later. I can't lie and say some of these moments don't bring out immense frustration, but for better or worse, nearly all of them end in a feeling of pure elation. Well played, Miyazaki. When looked at more closely, these singular aspects of design can lead to my second love, situational narratives. Rather than something relating to the overarching story, by this I mean little adventures unique to your own playthrough. Perhaps using a master key, you made a terrible mistake in descending the depths of Blighttown against Quelaag immediately, only to realize fighting her without an upgraded weapon is quite an ordeal. With no Lord Vessel, you're now a paltry undead bitterly climbing their way back to Firelink against all odds. Or maybe Seath cursed you in your first encounter, and you're left stranded with no purging stones. If you're like me and have a disturbing addiction to seeing how long your HP bar can be, that's a scary proposition. Your playthrough immediately shifts gears to solving this problem, or learning to live with it for a short time. If you want to rid your curse, you'll need to make it through the archives and teleport far away. No easy feat when given a harsh penalty to a valuable resource. Not knowing what curse does and letting it build in a scenario where you're meant to be defeated is brutal design, especially knowing you're going to be trapped far away from purging stones. But there's also ways to avoid it, making the potential trap a unique situational narrative in your own journey. It's yet another example of how those unfair moments can shape your goals at a given time. There may be no greater example of this phenomenon than my third love, losing your souls. I might sound bonkers saying that I'm a fan of losing a valuable commodity upon death. It's evaluating what it means beyond that singular loss that lets you see the real value. Every second from the moment you hit play, you are at risk of losing your souls along with your progress. That simple number represents more than how far you've moved your character in a level. It's every single battle you've won with immensely important ways for that currency to be spent. Losing them creates a state of panic that can be minor or massive depending on where you lose them, how difficult they'll be to retrieve, and that's putting aside all the level progress you have to redo. It makes every death have significance in a game that teaches you through mistakes. It's a signature aspect of the game that allows dozens to hundreds or even thousands of situational narratives for the most unfortunate of players. What makes them so vital relates to my fourth love, the player being an empty canvas. Souls are the paint you use to illustrate yourself. Yes, but simply they are used to level up and increase your main stats. Beyond that surface level, they represent paths to construct your character in ways that genuinely influence different ways to play the game. A distinct element of RPGs is the ability to play different classes. Step into the shoes of a funneled role that excels in a specific fashion. In the Souls series, you are a clean slate when you begin a run. It's souls and equipment and your own personal artistry that decide how you'll use those two major areas to construct your character. With a massive amount of stat combinations, weapons, armor, magic, faith, pyromancy, items, hunter tools, on and on and on, every single playthrough has unique elements to it. The Souls series is what you make of it. A sky's the limit proposition assisted well by my fifth love, open-ended routing. Gathering the various supplies you need to create your chosen build will dictate how you play the game. Certain choices may require you to push through more challenging areas early, especially if you want more of the full playthrough with the desired equipment. You might even have to allocate valuable resources to ensure your chosen path is most efficiently reached. These choices reflecting on the previous loves can shape how you map your entire playthrough. Before I started my run of every game this past month, I chose 3 conditions. Number 1, I will focus on magic, only leveling dexterity and strength as much as is required for. Number 2, the Moonlight Greatsword, my main offensive option for each run. And number 3, I will do whatever it takes to obtain these items, killing as few bosses as possible. Being a trademark of every game, the Moonlight Greatsword is rarely available with ease. In Demon Souls, I was required to go immediately to the Valley of Defilement upon beating Phalanx. In Dark Souls, I relied on sorcery and a magic longsword to get beyond ONS and take on the challenge of cutting Cease's tail. In Dark Souls 2, I had to use a bonfire S-stick and kill the Duke's Deer Freya in New Game Plus while having barely progressed in the game, though I did become a rotten farmer to bolster my stats. In Dark Souls 3, I had to fight Dancer and Osiros early. If I hadn't allowed myself to kill the Crystal Sage and spend hours farming souls and claiming upgrade items in Ashes of Ariandel, I'm not sure how long it would have taken to best Ocelot's Shrieking Daddy. Look, normally I'll just take my lumps with subpar stats, but I was deeply scarred by the 4 hours I spent getting horse-kicked by Ludwig and Bloodborne to claim an early Guiding Moonlight. When you can't regularly stagger him in phase 2 and don't have bitch vigor, by God he's lethal. As for Sekiro, well, I modded a texture onto Kusami Maru, which required my path to veer into the treacherous Google search engine. Oh yeah, open-ended routing is no joke. In seriousness, looking at the wikis and creating routes for each of these playthroughs was almost as much fun as playing the game itself. Seeing everything come together was so satisfying, especially when it required besting those insane challenges. The magical end of the builds wouldn't have been possible without my sixth love, NPC quest design. Look, I'll come out and say I'm too dense to figure out how even a single one of these properly work out on my own, let alone doing them all, but I can appreciate how cryptic they can be. Not only is this structure satisfying for those who want to explore every inch of the world and uncover its secrets at the right time, it's also fun across multiple playthroughs when you discover a new story you've never seen before. Despite being well aware of Big Hat Logan as a character, I'd never actually done his quest since I usually avoid casting. Following his descent into madness through the archives was gripping, ending in a full-tilt nudist brawl that had me dying from the twisted absurdity of it all. I get that for one-time completionists, the obscure design of NPCs may be a detracting factor, and even I've felt that way in the past, but personally as it is now, I love all the secrets you can slowly chip away at in each playthrough, even if some aren't the easiest to follow. No matter what assistance or path you take to developing your build, there's a universally useful tool for every run if you have the skill and are willing to shoulder the risk. I love parrying. The quintessential risk-reward gambit of combat wagers a massive defensive loss, even your demise in some cases, all for an unprecedented opening to riposte the enemy. Honestly, I love this mechanic for the sound effects alone. That thunderous slam adds so much weight to your success. Then you slam all that force down into skewering your opponent. It took me ages to figure out the correct timing, and even having mastered the technique, there's always the risk of whiffing. My heart races every time I go for it. If that ain't love, I don't know what is. Of course, parrying isn't effective in every situation. There's no single ability in the game that's flawless. The game is all about exposing vulnerabilities in your strategies against your opponents in combat, and how you claw through that equation to come out on top. No matter what strategy you employ, you win some, you lose some. There is, however, a single insurmountable foe that will forever remain undefeated. Good old gravity. In a series full of dangers, it's almost comical how much the developers are addicted to designing levels with precarious ledges with progression and loot to tempt you into their clutches. It's yet another layer of significant pressure that makes up the oppressive atmosphere of the Souls series, especially outside of Sekiro where mobility is heavily limited. Of course, you must know by now that I'm a masochist, so of course I adore more things against my favor in this sadistic franchise. My background as a kid was in platformers, so commonly seeing pits of death in an action RPG centered on ground and combat is a devilish treat. In a series involving heavy strategy, resource management, and skillful combat, the Saitama of the series will always be victorious. With much of today's list being centered around the odds being stacked against your favor, it's easy to think back to one of gaming's most classic lines: "It's dangerous to go alone."
Take this.
As much as our favorite man-horse may disagree, in your darkest hours of desperation, you may feel like the weapon at your side isn't enough. It's in those harsh moments you may spot an ethereal ghost passing you by, an elementary sight to remind you there are others struggling on their own journeys who haven't yet given up. That sense of camaraderie might be just what you needed to continue pushing yourself forward. If not, you could read their advice scattered in messages for a boost, or even view their bloodstains to play back their final moments before death. If even that's not enough, engage in jolly cooperation and take on the world together. All of this is incentivized through rewards for helpful messages that aren't tonguing your butthole. Well, let's be honest, we're rating those too. And even covenants that encourage mercenaries to slay your bosses. Of course, players can also add to the brutal world by invading to steal your resources from you by force. It's a one-of-a-kind cooperative and competitive environment that adds considerable depth to how you play the game. But it doesn't end there. The cryptic nature of the game's systems and lore begged players to find each other outside of the game to trade secrets. It was this word of mouth that took Demon Souls from an initial failure to a cult classic. that community has only grown in size as the popularity of the games has swelled in turn. We've got half a dozen wikis for game strategy, lore, you name it. There's build calculators, various discords focusing on PvP, tomb prospecting Bloodborne's chalices, or simply discussing the game online. There's been so many impactful fan projects over the years, like DS Fix, a mod that made the Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition functional on PC, to now an entire demake of Bloodborne with its own creative ideas, not to mention hundreds upon hundreds of mods, from minor texture reworks to massive game reworks and even expansions. The love the fans have for this fantastic series has seemingly limitless heart and soul. As evidenced by this list almost entirely being an admission of similar affection, I'm happy you joined me as I've shared it with you all these years. I cannot wait to write the next chapter of that journey soon with Elden Ring. Be sure to subscribe to stay tuned for that and more on all the great game releases soon to come. I want to thank you for always supporting what I do. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.